So El Rabbanan, according to the rabbis, that's in other words, the beginning of our Mishnah. Heichasarif lahu, where do you burn the karbanos? Like in which direction from Yerushalayim? Um, is that is that burning site? Kidatanya. We they would hold like the following brisa. Heichon Nisrafim. Where do they burn these? Litzvon Yerushalayim, north of Yerushalayim. Chutz l'shalosh machanos, outside of the three camps. So the camps were called in the desert. The camps were called Machne Yisrael, that's the outer ring, Machne Levia, which is the inner ring, and Machne Kahuna, or the which is the very inner ring, and that corresponds in Yerushalayim to the Mikdash, the inner one. The Yerushalayim is the like corresponds to Machne Levia, and the outside of that is Machne Yisrael. Um, Rabbi Yossi Glili Omer, Abeis Hadash and Nisrafim. No, they're burned at the place of the where you take the ashes, right? So that the same place that the ashes were taken out of the mikdash and dumped. That's where that's where these sacrifices were burned. Amar Rava.
I saw says the note that we actually paskin according to Rabbi Yossi Haglili here.
Yeah, I mean it makes sense because he bases on pasuk al shefa chadesh and yisaref, right? That it gets burned on the shefa chadesh and on the ash dump. So it sounds like that's the place. Amar Rava. Um, Montan Polyclid, Rabbi Yossi Lili, who argues with that. Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakovi. Titania, we have another brayso al shefa chadesh and yisaref. This pasuk that you burn it on the ash dump. Sheyehesham Dashan. That there should be ashes there before you burn these sacrifices. There should be ashes there. Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov Omer Sheyehei Makomo Meshupach. That it's not that there have to be ashes there; it should be suitable for an ash dump. Um, so so Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov clearly doesn't require you to do it exactly at the place that the ashes were dumped. I mean, these ashes were dumped every day, so there had to be something there. It has to be a place that was suitable for that, not the actual place where the ashes were actually dumped. I'm going to Abaye. So Abaye says, Dilma bimkomo meshupach plige. Um, maybe the argument is between the Tanakh and Rabbi Eliezer. Um, Not that, like, maybe they both agree that there have to be ashes there in the first place, and they're only that the oh, okay, I left out a detail that the Mekoma Meshupach is not a place that's suitable for ashes. It means it's suitable for pouring. In other words, it's on a slope. Okay, not a flat place, but a hillside or a slope, so that that things pour off it, as it were. So maybe Abai says to Rava, maybe maybe they both agree there have to be ashes there, but the only question is, does it have to be a sloped part? Like maybe it flattens, or you dump a lot of ashes, you use up a lot of real estate. Maybe it's not sloped anymore. Um, fine. So Abai says maybe that's not exactly the machlokas. Tana Rabbanan. Asarif Matami Begadim, the one who burns the animal, he becomes tummy. His clothes become tummy. V'lo hametzis or matami begadim, but the one who lights the fire, he doesn't make his clothes tummy. V'lo masadar samaracha matami begadim, also not setting up the wood pile like to before the fire is started. He also doesn't become tummy. His clothes don't become tummy. Only the one who actually does the burning. Ve'ezu asarif. Who is this guy? Hamasayeh b'shas sreifa. What we mean by the one who burns means anybody who assists during the burning. So, you're adjusting the fire, you're moving the animal around to get it burned properly. Anybody who's involved in the actual burning of the animal, but not in the preparation for burning. What about after it's burned down to a crisp? It's become ashes. Um, um, uh, I might have thought that even after it's just ashes, it still makes you tame, your clothes tame. Talmomar osam. Hasaref osam yichabes begadav b'mayim. The one who burns them, meaning the animals, and osam metamim begadim mishanasin efer ein metamim begadim. The animal itself, while it's burning, can make your clothes tame, but not once it's already burned. It's not the same thing anymore. It's just ashes. Rabbi Shimon Omer osam metamim begadim nita chabasar en metamim begadim. It's he says it a little differently. Um, while it's still an animal, it makes you tame, it makes you close tame. But once the meat has decomposed, then it's not doesn't make tame anymore. Maybe now, what's the difference between these two? Amarava, Higuinao, Deshavye, Charuka. If The question is, does it continue to decompose after it becomes charred, after it becomes ashes? Um, so if you say there's a continual um, the process of decomposition continues even after it's burned, then Rabbi Shimon is saying that uh, even if it's ashes, it's still considered the animal itself. But once that decomposes, then it's no longer the animal. Whereas the Tanakh would say that no, once it's burned, it's burned. It's no longer considered the animal itself. That's the end of the parak, and we will begin the next parak. So new topic, which is where you're allowed to do a carbon. So once the mikdash was built, then there's all these rules that we've encountered already about, where exactly everything should be done, and only in the mikdash could you bring a carbon. Um, Before the mikdash was built, or at various times, like when there was no permanent sanctuary or no central sanctuary, I should say, then people were allowed to bring a carbon on a bama, on a private mizbeach, a private altar. Um, but once the mikdash is has become the central sanctuary, you're no longer allowed to do that, and all karbanos have to be done in the mikdash. And the Mishnah says, "Hashochev v'mala
Does a
b'chutz." If you do
private mean a
in your backyard,
designated private place that people could come, or does that anyone could set up his own
anyone
backyard?
anyone could anyone could set it up. Anyone could set up their own. You could do it in your backyard. So the Mishnah says, "Hashochev amal b'chutz." If you do shchita and you offer a sacrifice outside the mikdash, chayav ala shchita, then that is a violation for doing the shchita outside. V'chayav al hala, and also for burning it, for doing the offering itself is also an isur. And by the way, it's an isur kares, and if you do it accidentally, therefore you have to bring a chatos. Rabbi Yossi Aglili Omer, Shachat Bifnim, if you do the Shechita in the Mikdash, the Hela Bachutz, and then you do the burning like on the Mizbeach, use the Mizbeach outside the Mikdash, Chayev, then you are Chayev. That's prohibited. Shachat Bachutz, the Hela Bachutz, but if you do both the Shechita and the and the burning, the offering outside of the mikdash, chayav. Then you're also chayav. But shachat b'chutz. But if you did the shechita outside, the hela b'chutz, and then you offered it outside, pater, you're not liable. Shlo hela el davar pasul, because it's never became a carbon, right? If you did everything outside the mikdash, then it's not called shchutei chutz. It's not called it's just an invalid sacrifice. So and there's no kares.
But didn't we just learn a few moments ago that they burn the cows and the bulls outside the camps?
Oh yeah, that's for things that were supposed to be burned outside. Yeah, yeah, that was like the leftovers, right? There's certain parts of it that would be burned outside of certain korbanos. But here we're talking clearly about something that was supposed to be done on the mizbeach.
Hmm.
Okay. Amr Lo, so they argue with him. Afa shochet bifnim u'mal b'chutz. In that case, somebody, if you do shchita in the mikdash and then you do the hakrava outside the mikdash, kevan shosei apostle. Like it's possible. Once you take it out of the mikdash, it's no longer a valid karban. So why would you be liable for according to you, Rabbi Yossi, why would you be liable? It's puzzle, so you wouldn't be chayiv kares on it. And there's no retort. I'm not sure if the Gemara will address it or not. Hatami shachal ben kodesh tamei uben kodesh tahor. If a person who's tamei, if you eat kachim that is also tamei, or kachim that is tahor, chayev, right? You're not allowed, as a tamei person, you're not allowed to eat kachim, whether the kachim themselves are tamei or tahor. Rabbi Yossi Glili Omer, Rabbi Yossi says tamei shachal tahor chayev. Yes, if you eat kachim that are in a state of tahara and you're tamei, then you are liable. Shelo achal v'tamei shachal tamei pater. But if you, as a tamei person, eat kachim that are tamei, shelo achal pater, that's okay. Shelo achal el davar tamei, because you ate something that's tamei. In other words, it doesn't have its status anymore as a korban, and so if you eat it betuma, then you're not chayiv for eating kachim betuma. Amar lo, so they answered him, af tamei shachal satar. So in that case, you should say a person is tamei who eats kachim that are tahar, kevan shenagabo. Once you touch it, you're eating it. Timu, you made it tamei. So how would you ever be chayiv? Right? It must be that tamei shachal as tamei must be chayiv as well. Last thing in the
Say
Mishnah.
that again. It must be that he's chayiv in what?
Must be that you're chayav. It must be that you're chayav for eating kachim that are tamei. If you are tamei, then it must be that you are chayav, because otherwise there would be no situation where that could apply, right? Because if you're tamei, once you touch the kachim becomes tamei, right? So. So it must be, if the Torah tells you that there is a problem with you being tamei eating kachim, it must be it applies even to kachim that are tamei, because there's no other possibility for it to happen, right? If you're tamei, once you touch these kachim, they become tamei. So if Torah says you're chayav for eating them, it must be you're chayav for eating any kachim that are, even if they're tamei.
That could be. Couldn't you say, one could say that lachatchila and b'di'evet, that he's not allowed to touch it. If he touches it, yes, it becomes tamei. But if he's tamei, he shouldn't even go near something. He shouldn't make something tamei, because he
Right,
could mafia derabim.
But why would the Torah tell you that if you're tamei, you can't eat kachim? The only possibility for that to happen for you as a tamei eating kachim is if the kachim are also tamei, because once you touch them and eat them, they become tamei.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. Last thing, Mishnah, tahor shachal tamei. A person who is tahor and he eats kachim that's tamei, pater, then that's okay, because it's not in its proper status as kachim. She'ein chayav elo tumas haguf. The the problem of tuma is of the problem of eating kachim and tuma is only when the person who's doing the eating is tamei, right? But if the kachim themselves are tamei, then it's not an iser kares, right? That's not considered. If you're tahor and the kachim are tamei, then that's not an iser kares.
You still get flogged, though, according
Yes,
to
it's still prohibited. Correct.
yeah,
Okay.
according to Rambam.
So Gemara says, "Bishlam hala ksiv onesh uksiv hashara." So, as you probably remember, especially when it comes to kachim, there has to be in the Torah both a what they call a warn, an ashara, which I'll translate a warning, and the prohibition. Right. So in other words, it has to be repeated. You have to have two sources for everything. So in the case of the halah, the sacrificing itself, there's two verses. So we have a lav and we have the warning. What are they? Oh, sorry, not the warning, the punishment. Right? I'm sorry, I misstated. It has to tell you separately that something is forbidden, and separately what the punishment is, and that's required for something to be prohibited and for you to be liable. What are the two psukim here? Onesh tichsiv yal pesach al moed lo yavienu v'nichras haisho me'amav. If you don't bring the sacrifice to the Oel Moed, which is corresponding to the Mikdash, then v'nichras haisho me'amav. Then you get kares. That's the punishment. Ashara and the warning. Tichsiv hishamer l'cha pen talel lasecha. Be careful not to But don't bring your sacrifices any place you feel like. Um, this according to what Rabbi Yavin said. Now it sounds like Hishamar when you state if I state lo tale el asecha don't bring a carbon in the wrong place. That's a negative commandment, clearly, right? But if I say Hishamer, uh, be careful lest you bring your sacrifice in the wrong place. That's actually um, stated in a positive way, right? It's like be careful to not do something. That's a positive thing. However, Rabbi Yavin is saying that if it uses the word hishamer, that actually turns it into a lav, because that's clearly the meaning, right? If I say be careful not to do something, I'm really telling you don't do this. Okay, but even if I'm phrasing it in a positive way, so despite the fact that it's phrased in a positive way, the this is considered a lav. So then we have our Elon Lotasa. So we have our two psukim for the offering of the karban outside of the mikdash. Our shchita, but what about the shchita that the Mishnah said you're chayav for? Bishlama onesh. I know where it says the punishment. Tichsiv the pesach the el pesach ohel moed lo havio. So we have another pasuk that says, if you slaughter something and don't bring it to the Oel Moed, and hadn't brought it to the Oel Moed first, then you get kares el azhar minan. Where's the azhar? Amakra, the Gemara says, the pasuk says, v'lo yizbechu od. So it says, lo yizbechu od zivchem asher heim asher heim. They should no longer bring their sacrifices to wherever. So that's the negative commandment to not do the shechita outside. So Gemara says, "Haim v'ayla looked Rabbi Elazar." Wait, that's the same pasuk. As Rabbi Elazar used, "Yamar minayin l'zovech behema l'markulis shuchayev." So there's a Avodah Zarah called Markulis that apparently its worship was to throw stones at it. Okay, but Rabbi Lazar says, what if you do a korban to Markulis, which is not the regular way of worshiping it? Does that count as Avodah Zarah? And he uses this pasuk, Dichsiv lo yizbechu od zivchem asher heim lasirim asher heim zonim achreim, that don't the people shall no longer bring slaughter their sacrifices to these false gods. Emmanuel inyan l'chadarka. So if um, um, and we don't need that pasuk to tell us about regular idols, for whom obviously sacrifice is a pretty almost universal way of worshiping gods. So, but we don't need this pasuk to apply to regular idols, regular gods, to receive echayavdu, because we already have a pasuk that says. When people ask echayavdu hagayim Elohim. Um, so, uh, so that is understood as being like whichever the regular way of worshiping the idol. In other words, sacrificing. So, what is this pasuk loyz b'chol zivchem trying to teach? That's nevin l'shelo kedarka. This would apply to a deity which it is not customary to offer sacrifices to, rather to throw stones at it. So this pasuk is telling you, even so, if you offer sacrifice to it, then that is forbidden. So if we're already using that pasuk to tell us about Merkulis, so how can you use that pasuk also to tell us that it's a negative commandment to sacrifice outside of the mikdash? Amarabba, karibei v'lo yizbechu, ukaribei v'lo od. So we're kind of it's I don't exactly understand what it's saying here, but it seems to be saying the extra word od, v'lo yizbechu od as zivchem, not no longer do this. So that extra word is going to include both. Excuse me a second, I just want to get some water.
Why do you need to include both if you've already used one for one instance and one for something else?
Ask again.
Why would we have to say that the word od or any other word means both if we've already mentioned one pasuk for one instance and one pasuk for another one?
No, we have one because we need one. We need two psukim for each, Azhara and Onesh.
Oh, so what when you say both, you're just referring to Azharav the
Yeah,
Onesh,
yeah,
or
yeah. I'm
referring
saying,
to the
yeah.
different I thought you were referring to the different idol worships.
No, I'm referring to the. Sorry, I wasn't clear. I'm referring to the Azhara for Shchitas Chutz, and is one thing that you learn from that pasuk, and the other is irregular or sacrificing to an idol that doesn't require sacrifices. That is still prohibited. Um, okay.
So that's in this particular pasuk, which is lo yisbechu. What's the pasuk?
Lo yizbechu od es yivcheihem.
Oh,
Yeah.
I see. Okay.
Okay.
Markulis, there you said that you don't throw stones. I remember there was one these idols that they would defecate on the idol.
Right.
Was that Mark? I thought that was Markulis, but maybe not.
Um,
Maybe not.
I don't recall. But the thing about Markulis, whether or not it's the same, the thing about Markulis is that the Gemara understands that the only way to worship it is to throw stones, and sacrificing to it was not a valid way of worshiping it. Nonetheless, this pasuk teaches us that since sacrifice is kind of a universal worship thing, you still can't sacrifice to Markulis. So the Gemara says, "Akasi mibai le'lechatanyo." Okay, fine. So you found a way to use this pasuk twice, but from the word od. But there's still another thing that we learn from this very pasuk. Ad kan hu medaber b'kashim shehigdishan b'shas isur habamos. So v'ikrivam b'shas isur habamos. So the Torah is saying the Gemara is saying, what is the prohibition listed here? Kachim that were completely off, like dedicated and offered, or designated and offered during a time of centralized worship, right? Isur Bamos, that you can't use a Bama. But what about Sharei Anshan Amor? Because we already have the punishment stated, as we saw, V'al Pesach Ol Moed Lo Hevio V'nichras Ha'isha U'me'amav, and Azhara D'chsiv Yishem El HaPental El Lasecha. And the warning is, as we saw, be careful not to offer your sacrifices outside the mikdash. Mikan ve'elach. But from this point on, bizvachim sheikdisham b'shas heter abamos v'kriyum b'shas isur abamos. What about you have an edge case where I designated an animal for a sacrifice before the Beis Hamikdash was built, so I could have brought it in my backyard, and then presto, the Beis Hamikdash is built, and I still have this animal, and now I have to sacrifice it. So I would think that maybe since when I designated it, it was okay to use my backyard mizbeach. Maybe I could still use my backyard mizbeach, even though now there is a mikdash. Shenemar lamana asher yaviu b'nei Yisrael zivchehem asher hem zovchim. So that the people will bring their sacrifices, which they sacrifice. Zevachim shitartu l'cha kavar were al pnei hasadeh. So it really means, I mean, the simple explanation of this pasuk is, I'm going to build you a mikdash, and then so that the people will bring their sacrifices that they currently do out in the field, right, in their backyards. Now they're going to bring it to the mikdash, right? But the way the Gemara is interpreting it is Vachim Sheitarti L'cha Kavar, even those sacrifices that I said you could do in your backyard, in other words, ones that you already designated before the Mikdash was built, Al Pnei Asodeh, that's now that the Mikdash is built, your backyard Mizbeach is considered just a field, like outside the Mikdash, right? You can't do it. That if you bring, that tells you that if you do a sacrifice outside of the Mikdash, even if it's one that was designated before the building of the Mikdash, that's considered, out of bounds. in the field, as doing it in the field. Ve'avim Lashem. Rather, the pasuk says you should bring them to God. In other words, to the mikdash. Zu mitzvah say. That's a positive commandment, right? Bring your sacrifice to the mikdash. Lo taseminayin. What about where's a negative commandment from? Tamalomar v'lo yizbechu od. The Torah sums up by saying, and you will no longer sacrifice your sacrifices outside. Yachol yeh onish kares. Maybe I would think that's included in an Easter kares, this edge case. Tamalomar chukas olam tiazos lahem l'darosam. No, it's a permanent rule. It's a rule that has lasting staying power. Zos lahem v'lo acheres lahem. One second. Zos lahem. Tiazos lahem l'darosam. Chukas olam tiazos lahem l'darosam. What lasts forever? What is that you're always going to be chayav for this lo tasei and asei v'lo acheres lahem, but not it's excluding kares. So you don't get kares for this edge case. But the point of that we're bringing the brisa for is that this pasuk is telling us that these edge cases are forbidden to sacrifice outside of the mikdash, right? So now you have three things that you want to hang from this pasuk. But we already said, oh, lets you do two things, but what now we have a third thing. So we're looking for some other source.
So, but they were, how are you're learning that Kari did not apply? Because we just said they would be punished. Yachoye Anush Karet, right? So when we're saying Chukat Olam Zot Lahem Ledorchotam,
right, that is the summing up of the Lo Tasei and Asei, right, that we just saw. Right. This section nothing to do with kares. That's all I say in lo taseh. Right, and we're applying that to the edge case of you designated the sacrifice before the mikdash was built, and now the mikdash is built, and you need to sacrifice it. So that is that is just a saying lo taseh and not kares. That's what this pasuk is telling us, right? Or that's the second thing that this pasuk is telling us.
So when it says zot lahem v'lo acheret lahem, that referring to them, or it's referring
no,
to
it's referring to zos lahem. This punishment is for them, is for these cases of designating before the mikdash, right? So what the Torah says, what I've just told you, right? That not that you have to do that it's an assay to bring the korban in the mikdash, and it's a lo taseh to bring it outside the mikdash. That is an assay and lo taseh that applies to the case of when you designated the sacrifice before the mikdash was built, and then by saying tiazos lahem is like, okay, this assay and lo taseh is your only liability, and kares is not a liability for this case. When is kares a liability? After the mikdash is built, and then you start designating sacrifices. Then it's a kares thing. But if you designated it before the mikdash, it's only an assay and a lo taseh thing.
I mean, this was not likely very practical because they would know they would know the Beit HaMikdash is being built and so forth. How long can you hold the animal? I mean,
I know, right?
Hold the animal for what, 10
right, but I
years?
assume that's a great question. But I assume that until like the dedication was done, they did, maybe it took 2 years to build it, right? I don't know, I don't remember if we know how long it took to build it. But while they're building, until the kind of dedication ceremony took place, it's not the mikdash yet. Okay,
Right.
so there is like one point in time during which, like, before that point in time, there's no mikdash, and after that point in time, there is a mikdash. So if that's so, then at 9 a.m. I could designate my animal, and by 6 p.m. the dedication ceremony is done, and I can no longer bring it in my backyard.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so we're still looking for the third source. Elam Rabbi, Kal V'chomer. Actually, we got it from Kal V'chomer. Umam Makom Shelo Anash. He's here. If you have a case where there's no punishment of kares, but there's still an ashara. Um, and referring to a carbon that was designated before the mikdash. So we've seen that there's an asay and a lo tasay, but there's no kares, right? So he's here. Makom sha'anash eno din she's here. So kal v'chomer, right? If we have a case after after the whole thing took place after the mikdash was built and dedicated, so we know there's kares, so certainly the same ashara could apply. The same warning could apply, right? Um, so Amar Ravina Ravashi. So Ravina said, if that's so, lo yomar lav b'chelev. If you could use that logic, then you wouldn't need a lo taseh for chelev, right? For the forbidden fats of an animal. V'teisa kal v'chomer min nevela, because you could derive it from a kal v'chomer of nevela, like this. Ma nevela shlo ana, she's here. Nevela, eating a nevela, there's no kares, right? And there's a lo taseh, right? Chelev she'ana she'enadin she's here. Chelev, where we're told that the punishment for eating chelev is kares. So what do you need a lo taseh for? Use the lo taseh from nevela if you're going to use that logic. Also, coming to Rava. So Ravashi came to Rava. Amarle, Rava said, you could answer as follows: Minavela lo asya. You can't do a kal v'chomer from nevela to chaylev. The ikal mifrach, because you could overturn it. Like it's not a good kal v'chomer. Mal nevela shekain matame. A nevela is more strict in a way because it makes things tame, whereas chaylev doesn't make things tame. So it looks like nevela is more strict in that sense. So you can't use it as a kal v'chomer to chaylev. So Gemara says, well, mishratzim itamim. So learn it from a sheretz, right? The sheretz you can't eat, and they also make you tame. But the Gemara says no. Mala shratzim tamim shematamim b'mashu. No, shratzim are sheretz is more chamor because even a tiny bit of a sheretz makes you tame, as opposed to nevela where you need, I guess, an olive size. Um, so Gemara says, okay, so learn it from Mishratzim Taharim. There is a sheretz that you're not allowed to eat, but doesn't make you tame, like frogs, for example.
Grasshoppers?
Well, you mean non-kosher grasshoppers?
No, I was thinking of kosher. I meant you can.
Oh, okay.
But okay.
But then you could still say about sheretz tahar, malash rasim taharim she'isuran b'mashu. It's still a sheretz makes it, never mind the tuma, but even eating it, it's a mashu. It's only a small amount that you're liable for, which is not the case for chalev. So you can't compare sheretz to chalev. We're going to keep trying. May arla v'kalaya kerem. What about learn it from arla and kalaya kerem, right, where you're forbidden to eat it, but there's no kares. So chayla, which has kares, maybe you certainly are forbidden to eat, or you can use the same asara, use a kal v'chomer. But you could answer mala arla v'klai kerem sheken asurin b'hana. They have a stricture that you not only can you not eat them, but you can't even benefit from them. So maybe that's why there's maybe that asara. Applies only to them. So still we have nothing for Tzarek. And finally, the Gemara Mishvis, and Gemara tries from what about the produce of the seventh year? But again, it has a lav, and it's not Asar Bahana. So Chalev, which has kares, you could use the same lav. Malashvish, you can't tafas as damah. But Shvis, guess what? You can, if you try to sell Shvis, the money that you use that you took in return for the shvis also has the has the status of shvis, which is not the case of chalev, right? If you sell chalev, then you can keep the money, right? And truma. Finally, the Gemara says, "What about truma?" Well, truma is something that you can sell. You can keep the money. It has a lav, but it's not kares. So certainly chaylev, which is kares, is subject to that lav. No, can't use truma either. Shekain lo hutar miklala. There's never any exception. Like truma is truma, whereas chaylev, it depends. Chaylev from a domesticated animal is forbidden, but chaylev from a chaya, from a wild animal like a deer, is okay. So there are types of chaylev which are permitted, right? So truma is always truma, right? So you can't use that love to apply to chaylev, which is sometimes chaylev and sometimes not chaylev.
So chela from a deer, from a wild animal is permitted?
Absolutely, yeah.
You can eat chela from a giraffe, from a deer, from
As long as it's considered a kosher, non-domesticated animal, then yes, the chaylev is permitted.
wow.
Oh, open a restaurant.
The definition of domestic is actually kind of weird because there are now deer farms.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, of course there are.
They're not easy to manage because they're wild animals,
Uh-huh.
and there are people who there are I think there are bison farms as well.
Yes, I've seen them actually.
There
Yeah,
are ostrich farms too, right? Ostrich farms.
right. But
Ostriches
ostrich
aren't
is
kosher.
clearly not kosher.
Yeah. Okay. So finally, the Gemara says, "Mikul name." Now, why don't you just take the tzadashava of all of these? Um, like all of the take there's a law for all of these things, and the common denominator is that they're forbidden to eat, and so apply that to chalev. But no, Gemara says you can't do that either. Shekain lo hutru miklal. And same thing as truma. Guess what? All of them are always forbidden. Orla is always forbidden. Shvis is always forbidden. There's no exception, as opposed to chalev, where there is an exception in the case of a non-domesticated animal. So therefore, um, um, so we can't use a kal v'chomer. Um, Ah, so the kal v'chomer, so we can use the kal v'chomer that we proposed before, right? We proposed a kal v'chomer about our case of carbonos outside. So we don't need an extra pasuk for it. So we've got the pasuk that we're using for two things, and this third thing that our mission is dealing with is a kal v'chomer. And don't tell me I could use this kal v'chomer for chalev. Why did the Torah have to tell you chalev is forbidden? Because the Torah has to tell you that you couldn't use a kal v'chomer. Torah has to tell you because all the other things that you would try to use for a kal v'chomer are not the same as chalev. They are they are stricter than chalev in the sense that they are always forbidden, whereas chalev is sometimes permitted. Amar Rava, ikashli hakashli. Here's what you should have asked, or this is what I would ask. Hadisnan, that we saw in the Mishnah. Pasach umila mitzvah saseh. Um, uh, one second.
He says it's difficult for him? Ikashili,
No,
akashili?
if you want to ask a question, this is what you should ask, or this is what I would ask. Like your question was not a good question. Here's my question. Pesach and Mila, they're the only positive commandments for which you get kares, right? Usually kares is a negative commandment. But if you fail to bring your carbon Pesach, or you fail to do a bris Mila, on yourself, then, or yeah, I think it applies to oneself if your parents didn't do it for you. Um, those are the only positive commandments that are subject to kares. Teisei b'kol chomer.
But they're not uh completely what I want to say. They're not always, there's not always a karet. There are exceptions where one doesn't have to do a Brit Milah. Or a Pesach, he can't bring it. He does it Pesach Sheni, or he's far away. So there are, even in those cases, it's not an automatic karet if he doesn't do so.
Right. So the exemption for Pesach Sheni is if you have an excuse, right? If
Right.
you are tamei or you're far away outside Yerushalayim. But what if you're in Yerushalayim and you're a tahar and you don't bring the carbon Pesach?
Right.
Then Pesach Sheni doesn't apply to you. That's an Easter that's a mitzvah saseh that is subject to kares for
But
not
Brit
for failing
Milah,
to
if
do
there are
it.
two people that died and so forth in the family or something, then
Right. So I think it's the same kind of thing. Like then you're exempt. Okay. But if you don't do a bris milah and you're not exempt,
right.
then that's kares.
Enachinami. No,
Yeah.
enachinami.
Okay. Um, anyway, so Rava's saying, "Tasted b'chal v'chomer mimoser." You know what? I could say that these are actually negative commandments, failing to do a bris milah and failing to bring the carbon pesach. And what's my source? Kal v'chomer from nosar, right? Which is leaving leaving kachim past their time and not burning them. And what's the kal v'chomer? Ma mosir shlo ana, she's here. Um, no, sir, there's no kares, but there's a lav, right? Don't leave over meat from a carbon past the allotted time. Pesach humila sha'ana she'enadin she's here. Now Pesach, and no, sir, is like there's also a positive commandment to eat them during their correct time, and there's a law not to leave them over, right? So Pesach and Mila sha'anash. Now Pesach and Mila, where you do have kares, eno din shehis here. So say kal v'chomer from Mosar that there is a negative commandment, an implied negative commandment to um, not to let the Pesach or Mila go by. So Amar Ravashi. So Ravashi answered. Amrita Lishmata Kami Rav Khan. I told this to Rav Khan, and he said, "Mimos Asya." No, you can't do that kind of kal v'chomer. Dikla mifrach. You could question that. Malamosir shekain ein lo takana. Right? Mosir nosar, like once it's past the deadline, you're done. There's no way to turn the clock back and make this mutter again. But Tamar b'Pesach sheish lo takana. But Pesach,
You got Pesach Sheni.
yeah. So I'm not sure I understand this exactly. Okay, I would have said this about Mila, right? If I didn't do my bris Mila today, I could do it tomorrow, and then I'm good, right? So don't tell me from Nosar. Nosar is something that, there's a law of not to leave it over, because once you've left it over, you're done. It's too late. You can't turn back the clock. But um, Mila, if I fail to do Mila today, I can always do it tomorrow, right? So don't tell me it's the same love.
Well,
Now, what about
another
Pesach?
thing about the a Korban Pesach is if you leave it over past Pesach, past the actually Erev Pesach, you can bring it as a shlamim.
Yes, but you still haven't fulfilled the
You
mitzvah of
haven't
Korban
fulfilled your
Pesach.
obligation, but it's
Yeah,
not like you can't bring the animal as a korban.
yeah. Now, what I don't get is, what's the Gemara saying about Pesach here? Like
I
Pesach, like
said
I just
Pesach
said
Sheni.
before. Yeah, but
Rashi
like I
says,
said,
Esau
Pesach.
Takana Tashlumi Pesach Sheni.
Yeah. So it could be. So I could understand this two ways. It could be that even if even if I was eligible to do the Pesach on the Pesach Rishon, could I still bring a Pesach? And then I felt bad about it, and I'm like, okay, I'll bring a Pesach Sheni. Does that get me off the hook? I'm not sure. It
Good
seems to me like
question.
it shouldn't. But it could be that but maybe that's what Rashi's saying. Or it could be that Rashi's saying the Pesach is a category in which there is tashlumin, in which there is a makeup. Now, whether or not it applies to you, it's still something for which a makeup applies, maybe even to other people. So therefore,
Uh,
you can't use the Kal Vachomer. Yeah.
so Steinsaltz doesn't give a reference, but he says that you can bring Pesach Sheni even if you intentionally neglected to sacrifice.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so then I was wrong before when I said to Ken. And Ken's question was, in fact, exactly what the Gemara is saying now. What Ravashi is saying is that, yeah, don't tell me about Pesach because there's a Pesach Sheni, and the same with Mila. You could always get your bris Mila tomorrow. Okay, so we'll stop here. I'm leaving for Israel this evening, so David's taking over tomorrow, and David will be doing next week as well.
Have a great trip.
Thank you.
And if you decide to make Aliyah and don't come back, we understand.
Okay,
You can
it's
still do
very gracious of you.
you can still do Daf Yomi remotely.
Very gracious of you. Yeah, but it would be at well, actually, yeah, I could do it from Israel. It's just my schedule is not going to permit. But yes, okay, I will. Should I make Aliyah, I will endeavor to consider whether I can continue holding up my end of the daf for you. Have a good day, everybody.
I'm going in February. It's much less expensive then.
Okay. Have a good day.
Good day. Good week.